Heartbreaking finality. Her parents confirm 26-year-old Kayla Mueller, who was held by ISIS, is dead. Hitting the Hill. Catholic leaders visit the halls of Congress pushing for immigration reform and help for the poor. Boko Haram terror. The Islamic extremists kidnap more schoolgirls, hijack buses, and kill hostages in Cameroon. And hands-on. Superheroes and a nonprofit team up to give kids who have lost a hand a better grasp on the world. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, February 10th, 2015. Good evening from Washington. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. We begin tonight with a sad note. The 26-year-old aid worker held hostage by ISIS in Syria is confirmed dead. Kayla Mueller was captured in 2013. The Islamic State claims she was killed last week in a Jordanian airstrike. Today, the White House confirms Mueller's death, but say there is no evidence any civilians were killed during the airstrike. Mueller's family released a letter she had written in captivity, and it said, "If you could say I have suffered at all through this whole experience, it is only in knowing how much suffering I have put you all through." Mueller's aunts praised her as someone who dedicated her life to serving others.
She was generous, caring, compassionate like our sister Marcia. She was strong, driven. She had a quiet, calming presence. She was a free spirit, always standing up for those who were suffering and wanting to be their voice.
According to news reports in a 2011 letter to her father, Kayla said, "Some people find God in church. Some people find God in nature. Some people find God in love. I find God in suffering." The president vows to bring those responsible for Kayla Mueller's capture and death to justice. The White House may soon seek congressional authorization for military force against the Islamic State. Chief White House correspondent Susanne LaFrankie is here with more now.
Well, Brian, it seems as though Congress and the president may take action. Kayla Mueller's death could galvanize Congress and the White House to take action. President Obama is negotiating with members of Congress behind closed doors. His proposal is to fight the terrorists without a, quote, enduring offensive combat role.
This is a barbaric group. It's horrific.
Senator Kelly Ayotte, a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, welcomes President Obama's congressional approval for military force.
We have to destroy ISIS because they present a threat to us.
While overall there appears to be bipartisan support, some lawmakers want limitations, as was the case with the last war powers authorization 13 years ago.
We allowed ground troops under certain circumstances, but not open-ended.
The White House's plan would not restrict the fight to certain geographic locations, but limit targets to Islamic State militants. Committee Chair John McCain says the president's plan doesn't go far enough.
To somehow compartmentalize it is not only naive but incredibly foolish.
You're not going to destroy ISIL from the air. Somebody's got to go in on the ground in Syria. I am convinced that we'll have to be part of that force or we risk losing.
The White House hopes to submit the proposal this week as negotiations with lawmakers from both parties continues. While President Obama believes he has the authority to take military action against ISIS, congressional approval would send a strong message.
I believe it would be a powerful symbol for the Congress to send to the American people, to our allies, and even to our enemies, that the United States of America is united behind the strategy that the president has laid out.
Sources say the president will ask for a limited 3-year authorization, so the next president will have to seek renewed authority from Congress if the fight with ISIS continues beyond his presidency. Brian?
Thank you, Susanne LaFrankie. Blaise Misztal is director of the Foreign Policy Project at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Blaise, why is congressional authorization necessary?
Good to be with you. It's necessary very minimally, at least for legal reasons. We've been going after terrorists in the Middle East on the basis of an authorization of the use for military force that was passed 14 years ago in the wake of 2001 9/11 attacks, and specifically targeted against al-Qaeda, but we're going after a much broader set of targets today. I would think it's also necessary for strategic and political reasons. We haven't really decided what our strategy in the Middle East is, and we need to have that debate in Congress. And we also need to have a political debate with the country about why we really need to be engaged in the world today.
So to get authorization from Congress might be a challenge. There's a lot of disagreement among the members about this, right?
There is, and that disagreement is actually both within the parties and between the parties. And the disagreement is both about who we should be going after, whether it's just ISIS, whether it's al-Qaeda as well, whether it's Assad, whether it's other elements in the Middle East, how we should be doing it, whether it's just airstrikes, drones, or actually boots on the ground, and how long that should last, whether it's just 6 months, a year, or possibly longer.
The focus does seem to be on ISIS. That presents the most immediate problem. But as you mentioned, there are many threats in the Middle East, including the Assad regime itself.
That's right. It was the Syrian civil war that gave ISIS a chance to rise up and come to prominence. And so addressing any one of these in isolation is going to be really treating the symptoms and not the actual disease. If we remove ISIS, that just creates more room for the Assad regime to step into. If we get rid of Assad, that just creates more room for ISIS to step into. So we really need to have a much more comprehensive approach.
What do you think is the basis of that comprehensive approach?
Well, as Tom Keene and Lee Hamilton, the co-chairs of the 9/11 Commission, have argued, it really comes down to ideology. There's a Sunni Islamism that's really channeling hatred and violence for ISIS, for al-Qaeda, for a lot of these terrorist groups. And there's also Shiite totalitarianism coming from Tehran, which is supporting Assad, which is supporting Hezbollah, which is supporting rebels in Yemen. And unless we get to the root of those, which involves both limiting Iran's regional influence and really starts empowering the moderates in the Middle East, the Sunni moderates, we're not going to get to the root of the problem.
These extremists don't seem to be deterred, especially by violence. That's their life. So answering with violence doesn't seem to be the answer.
Well, we definitely need to be able to contain the violence. We don't want the conflict spreading. It's already spread from Syria into Iraq. We don't want Lebanon or Jordan, let alone Israel, imperiled. We don't want the situation in Yemen to spiral out of control. That could actually spill into Africa as well. So the first thing we need to do is contain the influence of these rebels, and that means also containing Iran's influence. But we're not going to be able to defeat them unless we really empower moderates.
It is indeed complicated. We appreciate you making it as clear as possible. Blaise Misztal with the Bipartisan Policy Center, thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much.
And now some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Boko Haram extremists are stepping up their attacks in Nigeria and beyond its borders. Intelligence officials from 2 African nations say the terrorists have raided several towns, kidnapping and killing dozens. Wyatt Goolsby is here covering that story tonight.
Brian, not only is Boko Haram attacking towns, they're also believed to be responsible for 2 bus hijackings, one in Cameroon and one in Nigeria. The surge in violence comes as several neighboring African nations are pledging military support to dismantle the terrorist group. It's now been 5 years since Boko Haram first started their attacks in Nigeria. Last year alone, 10,000 people died in scores of attacks launched by the Islamic extremists. But in recent months, the group has intensified its assaults on Cameroon and Niger. Regional leaders say they will create a military force to confront the militants. For now, thousands of refugees from Nigeria are seeking shelter in Cameroon, and many Nigerians blame the government.
The Nigerian army has sold out their people. They are just playing with Boko Haram. There were 30 of us, and they killed 27. I am just one of the 3 who survived. The powerful Nigerian army cannot take on Boko Haram. They are working with them. They have sold out the poor of Nigeria.
8 Cameroon schoolgirls kidnapped this week, a stark reminder of the schoolgirls captured in Nigeria last year. The recent increase in attacks led Nigerian officials to postpone national elections for 6 weeks.
If the security of personnel, voters, election observers, and the election materials cannot be guaranteed, the life of innocent young men and women, as well as prospects for free, fair, credible, and peaceful elections, would be greatly jeopardized.
Many have voiced disappointment and frustration with the decision. A recent poll by Pew shows 82% of Nigerians do not view Boko Haram favorably. That includes both Christians and Muslims. About 7 in 10 Nigerians say they are worried about Islamic extremism in their country. And more than 8 in 10 say crime and corruption are very big problems in their country. Today, Nigerian officials formed a panel to investigate reports of rape, child trafficking, and other abuses in camps for people fleeing from Boko Haram. The government says the panel will hold town hall meetings, talking with people in the area, and decide if any individuals working in camps are responsible. Brian?
Wyatt, thank you. Indonesian officials have found and now identified the body of a French co-pilot of the AirAsia plane that crashed in December. The co-pilot was initially identified by his uniform. His body and 3 others recently recovered were still strapped in seats. 74 of the 100 victims recovered have now been identified. AirAsia Flight 8501 was en route to Singapore from Surabaya when it crashed off Indonesia's coast in December. All 162 souls on board perished. Italian prosecutors say a cruise ship captain didn't order an evacuation quickly enough and is responsible for the deaths of 32 people. Francesco Schettino is accused of manslaughter and abandoning ship after all 4,200 aboard were evacuated. The Costa Concordia wrecked 3 years ago near the Italian island of Giglio. A verdict is expected as early as tomorrow in the trial that has lasted more than a year and a half. The defense argues equipment problems complicated the evacuations. They say the captain wanted to steer the Concordia closer to port. Some survivors swam 50 meters in frigid waters to shore. Nearly 3 dozen drowned. More than 2 feet of fresh snow has piled onto the winter-weary Northwest. Monday's snowfall broke records set during the blizzard of 1978. It forced hundreds of flight cancellations. Boston was hit the hardest. The city's rail service is largely shut down today. Forecasters predict more snow on Thursday and again next weekend, and they don't know where to put all that snow. A California lawmaker proposes replacing the statue of soon-to-be Saint Junipero Serra in the U.S. Capitol. Father Serra's statue has been in the Capitol since 1931. The Franciscan priest helped establish the California missions. Many of them became the centers of the state's major cities. A California state senator thinks his statue should be replaced with a less controversial figure. Critics say Serra was part of an imperial conquest that destroyed the Native American culture. Historian Monsignor Francis Weber disagrees, saying Father Serra set the foundation for what California is today. Pope Francis calls him the evangelizer of the West. He plans to canonize Father Serra during his visit to the U.S. in September. And Pope Francis is reminding us that we need to get up and get out into the world to spread the gospel. In his homily this morning, the Holy Father reflected on the right and wrong paths to God. Francis says we definitely can't find the image of our Lord on a computer or in encyclopedias. He continues, sedentary Christians, lethargic Christians will not know the face of God. The Holy Father says the only way to understand our identity is to set out on a journey. Coming up, kids who have lost all or part of a hand get a hand up from some superheroes. This 10th day of February is the feast of Saint Scholastica, twin sister of Saint Benedict. The two were very close. In fact, their religious communities were only 5 miles apart. It's believed Saint Benedict directed his sister and her nuns by the same rule his monks lived. Thanks for joining us on this Tuesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Well, Catholics from around the country make their voices heard on Capitol Hill today. They're here to talk to members of Congress and their staff. Jason Calvi was there with them.
They might need directions to navigate the tunnels under the U.S. Capitol. But this group of Catholics from Southern California knows exactly where they're going.
I think there are some 50, 60 million Catholics in the country. That's a huge percentage of the population of the country. They want to know where the church stance is.
Talking about Frances Jante's father marched with Martin Luther King Jr., and that has influenced her life.
I can empathize with the people, the immigrants now, and they're fighting for just dignity, really.
She's one of hundreds of Catholics from around the country who have come to D.C. to discuss the church's teaching on social issues.
The Catholic Social Ministry gathering.
Today they're bringing up issues important to them with lawmakers.
And immigration reformation is one of the top priorities in California.
But there's one issue not on their agenda.
How come the issue of abortion is not being addressed today by this delegation? What would you say to them?
Sergio Lopez of Catholic Relief Services says today, on this trip to Congress, the group is focusing on other issues.
We're one church, we're one church, and we have many things that we care about. And I was really happy to see, as a matter of fact, last month, the March for Life.
And I'm told the advocates did address the HHS contraceptive mandate in their visits to Congress last year. The Bishops' Conference tells me abortion is addressed at other times of the year, including during the March for Life, Brian.
All right, thank you, Jason. And U.S. senators take a stand for vaccinating children. A Senate Health Committee hearing today addressed the public health successes and the challenges of vaccinating kids. The CDC's immunization chief emphasized the importance of vaccinations.
Vaccines are safe and highly effective, and it's important for parents to know they're the best way to protect their kids.
The hearing was scheduled before the recent measles outbreak. The CDC says the U.S. has seen more measles cases this year than any full year since 2000. Prosthetics meet printers, a new movement quickly gaining support, and Catherine Szeltner is here with the story on the future heroes of health.
Brian, this is an example of technology changing the face of modern medicine. 3D printers are giving a helping hand to those in need. Superheroes are joining forces with nonprofit Enable to give kids a better grasp on the world. Enable is a network of volunteers with 3D printers who print and assemble assistive devices at no charge. The group paired up with Marvel Universe Live characters in Texas recently to give 14 kids free mechanical hands. Kids who lack all or part of their hand.
It's pretty special getting the opportunity to do this.
Ivan Owens is a designer and 3D printing project manager for Enable. He spoke to us from his lab at the University of Washington, Bothell on the benefits of 3D printing for prosthetics.
Because you can use a 3D printer to generate these hands, which are then fairly easy to learn for people to learn how to assemble. For materials cost of about $50, families can build at home a device that on the market would be comparably about $2,000 to $3,000.
3D printing also means you can customize your design and fit it for a wide range of people. Justin Chambers usually plays Marvel superhero Thor, but here at Houston Shriners Hospital for Children, he strikes a more gentle tone.
Being kind of the first generation of seeing these kids being able to do small things I take for granted every day, it's such a blessing.
It only takes about 2 hours to assemble these mechanical hands, so the dreams of these kids can continue to soar up, up, and away. Catherine Szeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Up next, we discuss the consequences of Canada's Supreme Court ruling that could lead to legalized physician-assisted suicide. And Pablo Picasso's heirs challenge a handyman's claim the painter gave him art worth tens of millions of dollars. Thoughts from Pope Francis on the elderly and infirmed, and every elderly person, even if he is ill or at the end of his days, bears the face of Christ. They cannot be discarded, as the culture of waste suggests. They cannot be thrown away. Pope Francis made those comments addressing the Catholic healthcare professionals. Thanks for joining us on this Tuesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick, and Canada's bishops say suicide is neither an act of justice or mercy. They're commenting on the Canadian Supreme Court decision striking down a ban on doctor-assisted suicide for some patients. It paves the way for the legalization of assisted suicide for mentally competent adults who are terminally ill. The Canadian Parliament has a year now to draft new legislation that would recognize the right of consenting adults to seek medical help to end their own lives. Peter Stockland is Senior Director of Publications and Media for Cardus, that's a Canadian think tank, and he is also the publisher of Convivium magazine. He's worked throughout Canada for 30 years in the media. And Peter, what do you think was the rationale behind the Supreme Court's decision there to open the door to assisted suicide in Canada?
Well, Brian, there's been a tremendous amount of pressure in Canada, of course, as there has been around the world for what Pope John Paul II called the culture of death is spreading its tentacles. And the legal rationale, if we can dignify it with that term, is that if you can commit suicide, you can ask to have someone help you commit suicide under certain conditions and according to a certain regime that has yet to be developed. What it's done is embed the narrative of the right to die, and it's extended what we all accept as certain provisions within healthcare, a certain personal autonomy. It's extended that to death. You have the right to refuse treatment. Therefore, you have the right to say, I not only don't want treatment, I want death as a treatment. I want a doctor to come with a needle or a pillow over my face or whatever it might be and end my life at the time of my choosing.
So Canadians view death as a form of health care, according to that description, or at least some of them. How do you think the debate in Canada compares to that in the U.S. when it comes to these national life issues?
From what I can see from this side of the border, there's a far more vigorous debate that has gone on in the United States, Brian. In Canada, we've had no law on abortion, for example, for 27 years. We're now at the point where we can't even discuss it politically, and that's not a figurative language, that's literal language. Our federal government has said we will not discuss that as a political topic. The same thing is happening with doctor-assisted suicide, with the right to die movement. It's becoming verboten to actually even open it up and discuss it. I went through a process in my home province of Quebec a couple of years ago where it was supposed to be an open consultation. Ultimately, it became a circumscription of discussions against the rationale for assisted suicide and euthanasia. So in Canada, as unfortunately is too often the case, debate takes place in very narrow, very circumscribed circumstances, and that's going to happen or is in the process of happening here as well. Certainly
Very
not.
troubling.
Yeah,
troubling. Very briefly, can you say that you wrote that there were some positive things about the ruling, like what?
Well, it does open up the door for a very powerful political response. It's the last gasp political response, but if the pro-life movements can get their act together in this country, they can bring pressure. The Supreme Court decision was the language can be construed as being very narrow. If we can get out on top of it, the political pressure can be brought. It also, in fairness, was very, very strong on conscience rights. Doctors in this country will not be forced to perform assisted suicide, and our own Federal Medical Association, or National Medical Association, many doctors have expressed deep concern about doing it. So there are two positives there. Conscience rights are protected, and doctors themselves can be mobilized to fight against it.
Peter Stockland joining us from Ottawa, Canada, and Cardus, the Canadian think tank. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much.
So would Pablo Picasso have given more than 270 works of art to an electrician who worked for him? That's the question a French court must answer. A handyman for Picasso's estate and his wife claim the artist gave them lithographs, collages, paintings, and drawings. Now, Picasso's heirs say this is ridiculous. They argue the master would autograph art he gave away, and they say he would never give away so many of his works. They're estimated to be worth between $68 and $113 million. Pablo Picasso died in 1973 without leaving a will. The couple, whose trial began today in France, could face prison and fines of up to $400,000 if they're convicted of concealing stolen goods. Well, tomorrow is the Feast of Our Lady of Lourdes. We will be here tomorrow with special coverage of this very special feast day. And I also ask you to keep the family of Kayla Mueller in your prayers. Today it was confirmed that the 26-year-old aid worker was killed in the Middle East, and we're not sure exactly how that happened, but we'll have more on that tomorrow as well. So until tomorrow, we encourage you to like us on Facebook. Please follow us on Twitter. You can watch again on EWTN's YouTube page. For all of us at EWTN News Nightly, our entire team, I'm Brian Patrick. Thanks for watching tonight. Good night, and may God bless you.